welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we are going to continue our discussion on the way that spiral dynamics and the ChangeGrid interrelate. And specifically, I'd like to talk about how we go about moving people from wherever they are to wherever they might want to go next, or moving groups as the case may be. I thought a good way to get this started, though, was to go back to the earliest level of spiral dynamics. And I'm just going to ask you guys if you can tell me where on the change grid this stage of life might have put you on the change grid. So where on the change grid might you be during this particular time period? So if you look at the beige level, that's the oldest time. So beige was all about instinctive survival training, or survival being the focus of the day. Very limited self-awareness, relies on instincts. I'm reading from another document that's too fuzzy to actually show on screen. But very limited self-awareness, relies on instincts and habits to survive, motivated by food, water, warmth, sex, and safety, because some things never change. And they group together in order to survive. So pretty much things were very automatic, reflexive. I think it's interesting, centers around satisfaction. Don't know quite what that means. Driven by deep brain programs, instincts, and genetics. Little awareness of self as a distinct being, so you're undifferentiated. They live off the land, much as other animals, and they have minimal impact on or control over the environment. So I think we're looking obviously here at the earliest stages of humanity. So what do you think? Where on the change grid do you think people were living? Where would this put you? Where is daily life?
Upgrade danger zone.
I'm in the upgrade danger zone. So that's why I think it's interesting, centers around satisfaction. Now, if satisfaction means satisfying my need for food, or satisfying my need for warmth or safety or whatever, I can see where satisfaction would imply. But if they're talking about satisfaction as far as being contentment in one's life, I would imagine those moments were rather infrequent. And, maybe if at some point during the day they could find a nice sunny spot to just sit quietly and feel well fed and feel non-threatened, okay, fine. Maybe there's a little bit of that satisfaction that happens as well. But that would not seem to me to have been the order of the day when survival sense was what was really being triggered. Yep. Okay, so are we all in agreement on that? You guys, feel free to unmute and chime in. What do you think?
Yeah, well, for T, in my individual case, I'm blessed because I was able to very quickly transition to the virtual world with, my own coaching, training, webinars, and it's going. So I kind of feel like I'm in power for the most part, and I'm also looking for now, how do I play a bigger game?
Right.
But I think so many people are really put now into basic survival where they're really stressed. I don't have, my job has ended, or and I don't have the means to take care of my family. So I think there's so many people that are either overwhelmed or very stressed.
I'm so glad you made that contribution, because what I hope people are going to pull out of this whole discussion on spiral dynamics is that while we as a culture might be at a particular level, or because of how quickly these levels change within our lifetimes, maybe we got people at different connected kind of levels, there is still some people, some situations that could be moved all the way back to survival instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very important thing. Obviously we have to meet our clients where we find them. I would suggest to all of you that anyone who's in the survival mode is not in the position to engage your services, but that doesn't mean you couldn't volunteer them. So,
exactly. Yeah.
So now, Jane, go right ahead. You feel free to chime in.
Well, I'm just wondering if looking at it from a different way, rather than any one of the levels being at a certain point on or I guess a center. Well, they talk about in spiral dynamics is having a center of gravity within a certain level. And so one can be at various levels of the spiral dynamic in different aspects of their lives, but they will have a center of gravity within within one of the particular levels. And what I'm wondering is, even back in the beige level, if you look at the ChangeGrid, whether it would just be a rapid move around the ChangeGrid. So, when the saber-toothed tiger is outside your cave, you're
Yep.
going to be in that survival mode. But
Yep.
once you've killed the woolly mammoth and you're sitting around the campfire with all of your family telling stories, those needs have been satisfied, and you may be at a deeper, more spiritual level, closer to the center of the ChangeGrid. And so it may just be that, in my mind, or this is what I'm just purely making this up from my own knowledge of all this, is it's just maybe a faster ways and maybe a little bit more time spent in the way up grid. And they were also fairly skilled at,
Oh yeah.
how do you live in your environment? So,
Right. Well, and I think what you're doing is really just channeling, wisdom from within you, and the wisdom that's shared at a universal kind of a level. Because, as we said a couple sessions ago, there is movement always around the change grid for all of these. And so, in order to move up the spiral or down the spiral, however you're looking at it, you have to work through this. So yeah, you start off up grid in the morning because you're hungry at the very least. And so you go, all right, I got to go find something to eat. Well, it might move you out grid to go and do something. You might end up not finding a cute little squirrel, but a giant saber-toothed tiger, which could move you way up into stress or out into the fight mode in the outgrid danger zone. And then, you do it, you channel things, you're down grid and you relax, and it comes back in grid now where you can enjoy one another's company, or at least find some peace or whatever. So that's why we said, that beige thing involved large circles going around the change grid. But overall, I think that if we said, what would be the, what do I say, the overall level of tension that the civilization was experiencing at that point in time compared to what we have now, I think that it would definitely have been kind of an upgrade thing, or punctuated by very upgrade sorts of moments that would truly be life-threatening, where today we might be upgrade about things, but how often are those things, saber-toothed tigers? So yeah, anyway, so I think that's an interesting thing, because that then would lead us on to the purple. Why did purple arise? And if you read this, it says, well, purple was, that is, life is in the lap of the gods, motivated by strong allegiance to a chief, elders, ancestors, and the individual is subsumed in the group. There's a strong belief in spiritual and the mystical, sacred objects, places, events, rites, and customs are essential. So this is the kin spirits, the clannish kind of level. Obey the desires of the mystical spirit beings, show allegiance to elders, customs, and clans, preserve sacred places, objects, and rituals, bond together to endure and find safety, live in an enchanted, magical village, and seek harmony with nature's power. So what do we think about that? What was it about that beige level that ended up giving rise to this purple sort of level?
This is Kathy. It's probably the awareness that they can't go it alone. That in the process of surviving in that way, coming to grips with the notion, maybe as their brains evolved, however that process worked, grew. We know that brains did grow over time,
Yeah, yeah.
that understanding that there are certain things that are in their control and certain things that aren't in their control. So coming to grips with what isn't in my control and what can I then project out, and can I begin to trust something outside of myself in order to survive. It might be that shift in consciousness based on the experiences that people had in surviving and the different experiments probably need, both individually and with groups, et cetera, in order to move through that process of survival. So that's my just best guess right.
Excellent. And would you say then that that movement is an upgrid, an outgrid, a downgrid, or an ingrid kind of movement? Any thoughts on that?
I would have to say it's a downgrid, from high stress, downgrid and outgrid to some
Right.
degree.
Yeah, and so I'll throw a couple things out there, then ask you guys to chime in on this. A couple of things that I recognize about the movement from beige to purple was that there was an attempt to figure things out, to explain things. And so as far as movement on the change grid goes, I kind of hear, let me show you guys a change grid real quick, that people were here and upgrid about whatever those issues were, feeling very challenged, not having much ability, understanding, etc. And so they tried to go about explaining what the phenomenon was all about, so that they could feel a little bit more protected, perhaps a little greater level of safety. Otherwise, why would we have invented the concept of, gods in nature, spirit beings, sacred places and objects and rituals? These kinds of activities were about saying something can explain everything that we're encountering. Something has to explain fire, and something has to explain the changes that take place in our environment. Something has to explain these animals that I am looking at or encountering as I go about doing things, and I'm seeing birds and whatever. So I think there's an attempt to try to understand, describe things in a way that enhances someone's sense of ability. And then
Yeah,
the
I
second,
think people were living longer.
well, because they were probably, as they started to bond together to endure and find safety, came together, they were probably less subject to being picked off by wild animals, because the fact that they're in a crowd of humans probably scared some of the animals away. So you got that thing too. They're not being as threatened. So far, we haven't seen any warfare appear in that, but there might have been some of that fighting for resources that was going on.
And T, I'd like to add too that I wonder if maybe the prefrontal cortex started developing, so that as the brain started developing, people's abilities grew and their ability to start thinking. And so thus, as their abilities grew, these things kind of occurred naturally.
Yeah, well, and certainly to create a mythology is evidence of some sort of intelligence. Otherwise, why would they have even tried? They would have just stayed the instinctual sort of mode. So I think it's interesting that they're definitely looking for these explanations and seeking to try to understand what's going on. But if you notice, the other thing that's happening here is there is now a rise of power or authority. So this idea about elders, custom clans, what is that all about? Why are we suddenly showing greater levels of allegiance to the group of people, the clan, to the elders? I mean, is there now a rise of certain people who in the power system decide that they are the ones that should be looked at? I mean, I don't think we've come into chiefs yet in there, but I think that's it. Why would I show allegiance to an elder? Why would I show allegiance to another clan member? So that too, I'll throw it out there. You guys are all muted. So unmute if you want to say something. Um, is I think it's also a downgrid maneuver. Because if I can say, I feel out of control about this, this, and this, but I recognize someone in our clan has great ability to do this, this, and this, then I'm going to defer to them. And so any clan that has got someone who's an exceptionally skilled hunter is likely to revere that hunter, and sooner or later might bestow upon that hunter certain levels of magical power or certain abilities beyond what the individuals who are otherwise making up the clan might be feeling.
Right.
Yeah. So you kind of see this. So now we're starting to not only have groups forming, but hierarchy within those groups forming. And we're starting to develop practices to reinforce that and all that. But it's downgrid maneuver. It was all to try to say, like, this survival stuff, man, we got to find a better way to do that. And so let's see what I can do to create some sort of understanding around it. So again, attaching this back to our work as tension managers, this ends up serving as a downgrid maneuver. Does it also serve as an outgrid maneuver? Or can you see a way that there might be some outgrid behaviors starting to come into play here?
Well, if you have hierarchies, then that's probably going to occur.
Yeah, because somebody's outgrid. And so now is the outgrid person in that, well, I'll go ahead and show the diagram, inside of the danger zone. So they're being supportive and being a good leader, being a good role model, all those sorts of things. Or have they stepped into the outgrid danger zone where they've gotten all full of themselves and actually come to believe that they are magical and, they are superheroes, or that they somehow or another deserve whatever the adulation is they happen to be getting, or the respect. Okay, so overall, we're watching as the civilization evolved, people being very far upgrade and now seeking to understand things. And ultimately that moved them a little bit further downgrid, perhaps a little bit outgrid, just because of the understanding and awareness. Now, by the way, their explanations could have actually been just plain wrong as far as today's understanding of how this phenomenon might have occurred in ancient times, but be there. And as far as existing inside of their reality, they did believe that they understood sorts of things. So if you need a fire god to explain fire, at least you know where fire comes from. Okay. So then things kind of evolved into this red sort of a thing. Oh, and by the way, if you guys read about these different levels in the spiral, one of the very interesting things that you will occasionally see is an attempt to identify and understand the overall energy and how it alternates. And some will say that you're moving from an internally focused to an externally focused, or from a aggressive to a compliant stage of things. And some energies even say male and female, but if you read what they're describing, then they're just talking about a nurturing spirit versus some sort of more of an aggressive sort of a spirit. So I know we're trying to evolve beyond those kinds of compartmentalizations, but nevertheless, people do try to say, hey, this alternates energetically in some pretty predictable ways as well. So we move on to the red. Now I think that those elders, those people who have been kind of lauded in their clan, step up a little bit. So red is the power gods, the egocentric meme. So I'll read what's written over here on my fuzzy kind of paper. This is: life is a battleground. Impulsive and egocentric are the keys there. Motivated to please self, very selfish, expects everything and appreciates almost nothing. Demands, doesn't earn attention and respect. Wants everything and they want it all right now. They feel no guilt or remorse. They are keen to beat, conquer, outfox, and dominate others. So reading what's on the screen here, in a world of haves and have-nots, it's good to be a have. So avoid shame, defend your reputation, be respected, gratify your impulses and sense immediately. fight remorselessly and without guilt to break whatever constraints are imposed upon you. Don't worry about consequences that may not come. Now, overall, what kind of a maneuver, energetically, what kind of a maneuver do you think red is representing?
Outgrid.
An outgrid maneuver. And so here we're seeing people who recognize the challenge is quite high, but they recognize that they have the ability to meet that challenge head on. So the outgrid is where all battles take place, where conflict occurs in a very active kind of a way. It's a place where the king of the hill will appear. So again, if we look at the engagement rings, this is where the intention is led to engagement, and the engagement leads to execution, and ultimately we end up in an outgrid danger zone. Where we are very risk oriented, highly risk tolerant, and far more interested in the outcome and how the outcome impacts us individually than who is involved in having that outcome actually be achieved. And so that would be some of the characteristics of that red kind of phase. Now it's interesting. I wonder what else might have contributed to the development from being that purple level to this red kind of level. Do we think the people who were just part of the clan and were busy doing their sacred rituals and feeling like they were living in the enchanted magical village and seeking harmony with nature? What do you think? Are they the ones that move things into red?
No, the population increased, and you had more tribal leaders, you know, battling over resources.
Yeah. And they begin to believe their own PR. I think that's the other thing. I think in Power Gods is also where we'd start finding, kings and queens and all those sorts of structures start to
Well,
appear as well.
what really happened, we know from archaeology that what happened was that when people moved from tribal organizations that were hunter-gatherer based to agriculture, and once agricultural communities were created, it is when hierarchy really took place. Hierarchy really began, and different kinds of jobs were identified, and people took control and power. So you tended to see more of that move toward what we call civilization, but a focus on that hierarchy when agriculture was just really starting, and wealth was created from agriculture, and that people started using slaves. And in a big way, and
Right.
it's probably about that time, based on my archaeological studies, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think this is also where, I've shared with you guys that Linda and I are in the midst of watching Rain, kind of binge watching the story of Mary Queen of Scots, actually the highly fictionalized story of Mary Queen of Scots. And it's amazing how much of all the conflicts that they seem to be going through are all related to wheat. So who has the grain? Who doesn't have the grain? Who's got the land to grow it? Who wants more land? And how can the ability to provide a country with wheat create bonds between countries? And it's like, whoever thought of all that as being one of the big driving factors? But bottom line is people were starving, and they needed to have whatever those resources happened to be. If you controlled those resources, you had true power in that time period. But yeah. But this idea about fighting remorselessly and without guilt, with that power came great conflict. And with that conflict came great loss of life, of whatever. So lots of fighting going on here, lots and lots of fighting. Okay, so now again, we're very much outgrid. And by the way, the only way that people that are very far outgrid can succeed is by subordinating a lot of other people. The vast majority of the population has to move down in the pyramid in order for the people at the top of it to kind of take control of whatever's going on. All right, so obviously over the course of time, and I think it was a very long period of time, this ended up showing itself to have problems, having limitations. And that's where we now start seeing the truth force come into play. So this is the blue kind of phase. I'm going to read from my little blurry sheet here. This is all about being purposeful, authoritarian, but the authority is God's authority. So life is God's will and law. Sacrifices yourself to the cause, the truth, or the grand pathway, motivated by following constitutions, commandments, laws, or codes based on absolute principles. Believe following those principles produces a good society now, and reward will be in the future. Impulsivity is controlled through guilt. Common sense rules behavior, and children should be educated to follow rules, conform, and conserve the system. So this is where people were trying to find meaning and the purpose in living, sacrifice themselves to the way for a deferred reward, bring order and stability to all things, control impulsivity and respond to guilt, enforce principles of righteous living, and the divine plan assigns people to their places. So going back to Rain for just a second, it's also amazing how powerful the Catholic Church was, and how much conflict arose as people started to try to adopt Protestantism as well. So what do you guys think? This idea for truth force, what direction is that trying to move people on the change grid?
I would say in-grid.
Ingrid, tell us more about that, David.
Well, they're thinking, and they're thinking more, but they're questioning their thinking and looking to a higher power. So they're in a constant kind of downward battle with themselves, or an inward battle with themselves to explain.
Yep. And so looking at the change grid, what David has just characterized is that if you were someone who had to live under the control of someone who's in the outgrid danger zone, and you had been subordinated, pushed down, actually you're being pushed further and further in grid, at a certain point in time, you have to find a way to survive the day, to kind of justify why are you going through another day? What's the big story? When is this outgrid person finally going to have their comeuppance? And this is where we kind of then can say, well, it's because of the evolution of God has a greater plan, and part of the plan involves whatever us going through, having our experience, going through whatever we're going through, knowing that it is for a greater good, that it is serving whoever it happens to may be, and that ultimately God is the one who will keep constraints around people who are exercising too much power, etc. So I think David's right. It's a bit of an in-grid maneuver. It's might also be a little bit of a down-grid maneuver, because it would probably have been energetically very exhausting to try to live in that red kind of phase, unless you were there.
Especially with the respond to guilt, you're shaming people, and that's driving them down.
Yep, absolutely. So this idea about people assigning people to their places, we've also recently been watching a show on PBS from Masterpiece Theater called, I forget her name, but she is a female detective. And it's back in the time period where women were thought of as being, nothing other than where heirs come from and all this. So she's totally doing something that would not have been typical at the time. But they keep telling her about her place. And this idea about she's being judged based on how she behaves. So an unescorted woman should never go out alone at night. So it's this whole idea of control impulsivity by triggering guilt, this idea about living in a way that meets the standards of whoever's been, put out there, and that you got to plan, you got to do that. All right. So again, it's an attempt for one part of society to control another part. So I think a lot of that power god stuff is still happening, but now I wonder if there is an additional power god that's appeared. It's not just the landowner. Now it could also be whoever's involved with the clergy, or whoever's involved with running the society as they kind of knew it. Yep. Thoughts about that? Yeah. Okay.
We know that's what happened. I mean, we know that's the rise of the Catholic Church, and probably similar rise in another part of the Catholic Church just became prominent and took over,
Yep.
essentially took over control and found ways to subjugate. I'm speaking as an ex-Catholic, so I'm bear with me. But it is the rise of power of the church and through gender inequality, wealth inequality, a whole range of different things that emerge.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it extended for hundreds of years. In fact, even if we go back to the 1800s, the world was very blue. At that time, there's still plenty of red going on. And, you know, there's always going to be some purple people floating around. But red and blue was still very prevalent in the 1800s, even entering into the early 1900s. The thought is that what kind of moved it into the orange was the industrialization of work opportunities. So that kind of changed things a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about what happens as we move from blue up to orange. And again, I'll be asking you what movement on the change grid did this involve. So orange is the achievist. Strategic life is what we have and own, motivated by risk-taking, competition, status, and image. Self-reliant people deserve success. Societies prosper through strategy, technology, and competitiveness. Earth's resources should be used to create and spread the abundant good life. And so on screen, the orange mode was all about striving for autonomy and independence, seeking out the good life and material abundance, progress through searching out the best solutions, enhancing living for many through science and technology, playing to win and enjoy competition, learning through tried and true experiences. So, what direction do you think we're moving as a collective?
I think we're moving upgrade, power stress, constantly trying to enhance ourselves.
Yeah, upgrade is definitely happening because we are becoming more competitive. So there's a stretch, there's a growth. What additional movement might you guys want to throw into the mix?
Maybe a little outgrid.
Some outgrid stuff, because again, this is about striving for autonomy and independence and achieving things because you're self-reliant, you deserve success, and prospering through strategy and technology. That means someone had to create that technology. Someone has to be the one who's building organizations around the sale and utilization of that sort of technology. So I think we've moved outgrid again.
Yeah, a lot more active thinking.
Yep. And which again goes back to what Peter said, because we're up in power stress. Solutions are only valuable if they solve something. And so there has to have been some issues. And again, because this is about industrialization, some practical kinds of things lend themselves to being automated and expanded and developed upon. And so off we went. And what do you guys think? Are we still in large part as a planet in this orange kind of phase? We still got a lot of blue going on. Is there still some red sprinkling itself here and there? What do you guys think?
Well, for me, I think the red, when I see egocentric, what happens if you have a narcissist or a malignant narcissist try to take over? It puts us back in red.
And well, and we think about that there are many that might attempt to, and by the way, this applies at a family level as well. So we read stories about families that are far more of a dictatorship than most of us would ever think of a family as being. So I don't want you to just think it plays out at certain levels. It plays out at every single level of organized humanity. But yeah, there will always be some red that's going on. There will always be some of that blue that's going on. This orange part is probably where most developed countries are at this stage of time. Would you guys agree with that?
I think a lot of a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, are more around green and
Yeah, moving into the green, moving into the green. Yeah.
I think the United States is especially in orange and has been for, you know, a while. If you look at Silicon Valley and
Mhm.
the entrepreneurial spirit of people in the United States.
Yeah, well, and I think I was reading a document that it was actually kind of an orientation packet that one of the universities put together for foreign students that were coming to study at their university. And they were trying to help them understand what our culture was all about to at least prepare them for culture shock sorts of situations. And one of the documents they put together, this is easy for you guys to Google if you want to find it, are what are the key characteristics of the American culture? And one of the very first things on the list is this idea that we are individuals, that we greatly, greatly value autonomy and independence. We're raised to know that sooner or later we have to take care of ourselves. And so a lot of that kind of spirit exists today, but it's what actually probably started the country long ago as well. People just trying to go like, I'm tired of being under everybody else's control, all those reds and all those blues. I'm tired of being under all their control. I want to go and practice my own life. And yeah, I get a lot of the people that came initially were looking for religious freedom or some way to escape persecution for whatever the religious beliefs happen to be. But I promise you, the merchants arrived very quickly thereafter and had plenty of opportunities to do whatever they needed to do to start creating the villages, the colonies, the cities, to whatever. So I kind of always feel like the U.S. at its cultural essence seems to be very orange.
That's the
um,
American dream.
it's the American dream: strive, drive, and so I completely get that. Now, as Kathy just said, now that by the way is an upgrid maneuver and an outgrid maneuver. So, or basically, I think it is an outgrid maneuver that recognizes upgrid situations that create opportunities for the outgrid people to step up and do whatever it is they really want to do. So as I read this, I kind of go, I'm just speaking my own personal truth right here. My head reads all this orange stuff and I keep going like, well, what's wrong with any of that? It all feels perfectly normal to me. So what's that all about? What's that all about? So there's that. Now, it's interesting that if we can just for a moment say that a great majority of our cultural energy is in this orange, there is still plenty of blue that is happening that could be, I'm not going to say pulling us down as much as it's holding us as a bit of a, and I don't want to say holding like it's being trapped by it, but it's holding us from progressing too far too fast, jumping too far beyond whatever's going on. So if anything, some of this blue can serve as a good, what's the best word for it? It's not restricting me. It's not constraining me as much as it might be tempering my enthusiasm.
How
Like a
about
buffer?
A buffer, that's a good word. Yeah. What else?
guardrails?
Some guardrails, yeah, something like that. Because obviously, if orange got totally out of control, it would have its own set of problems. And that, by the way, is where we're going to get into green in just a second. But I just kind of want you guys to know that there is always a yin and yang. There's always a drive to move forward, but something that continues to hold us back. Maybe some of that holding back is coming from a place of fear. So, for example, if we just say one aspect of the blue was about religion, the rise of different religions. Well, a lot of religions are very much suffering right now because they have less followers. In fact, I was reading an article that was talking about the number of Catholic churches that will probably have to close within the next handful of years, purely because they don't have enough priests to staff this. And so, years ago, we even started hearing about, oh, could we allow priests to get married? What's about that? Because it was all about even recognizing then. In fact, Linda's aunt, who's passed away now, was a Dominican nun for her entire life. And this is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, is where she was based. There's a place there called Marywood. And Marywood, is it Marywood? Mercywood, Marywood. And when you look at their building, you go, oh my gosh, this building could hold 500 or more nuns. And then you would go into it and find out, nope, there's only 20 some odd remaining in this big old building, and most of it's all been shut down, and on and on. And so I think that there is a kind of I want to say a prevalence of certain religions that are losing followers and other religions that are gaining followers. And so I'll give you an example of one that I think is gaining. So when Linda and I were living in Michigan, what was that church that people went to in the evening? And that's where Mastermind happened. It was kind of like a very modern sort of a church. I'll remember the actual name of it in a second, but it was all about you finding the best you. And if anything, it had a tremendous amount of green lesson in it, that you could still evolve. So there was some these different religious choices that were going to be more about holding someone back, and they seem to be losing in favor, where others are going like, no, we'll help to progress things forward, and they tend to be now being more embraced. So can you guys relate to Unity? The church was called Unity. Anyone have any thoughts about this idea that we can still be being pulled into the blue, into the, yep.
I think definitely you have also the rise of the fundamentalism, and also now this kind of movement towards these conspiracy theories, kind of fighting this movement to green. I kind of see us wanting to move to green. We have the climate crisis, and we have to, I think, to survive, somehow move to that green. And yet I think there are many forces trying to pull us back to say, no, that's, this is what we want. And I think now with these algorithms, it's, some people are being pulled backwards, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
This is more about values.
Yeah, it's all about the evolution of values. Yeah.
Blue is more constraining and green is more enhancing.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that one of the people that they aren't a spiral dynamics kind of person as much as they are an outsider who is critiquing spiral dynamics. One of the things that they put forward was that choose any level you want, and the level before it and the level that is beyond it will always be fighting with one another. So, because that's where the growth is coming from. So we are here in orange, and we're going to have conflict now between the blue and the green value sets. So now ultimately, if the spiral is going to do what the spiral does, sooner or later, we are going to migrate towards the green and ultimately end up in green. And there's two beyond that one. But there's going to be a lot of blue that's still going to be valued. And there might even be some of the red that is still valued. And yeah, okay, so now let's look at the green for a second and see what's going on. So green is all about now moving from striving to have what we have and collect what we've collected, to going like, stuff is not what's really important. What's important is people. And so green is described as the communitarian. I love the way they just make words up. The communitarian, egalitarian, that's not made up. Life is community and precious. So the green energy, the green values are motivated to free society from greed, dogma, selfishness, divisiveness, and the need to prioritize feelings, sensitivity, and caring. So Earth's resources are limited and precious. They should be shared equally among everyone, and all decisions should be made through reconciliation and consensus processes. So we go over here. We want to explore the inner beings of self and others, promote a sense of community and unity, share society's resources among all, liberate humans from greed and dogma, reach decision through consensus, refresh spirituality, and bring harmony. Well, I don't mind saying to you guys that personally, I'm okay with 3 out of those 6. So, but I'm not ready to jump to green. So I can see that there's value in moving to green, but I think that there's also risks and dangers, complications, heavy prices to be paid as we move from orange into green. That's not suggesting that I don't think we should go there at some point. I just think we need to go there thoughtfully. So that's me expressing my orange tendencies, wanting to hang on to orange. So anybody else have any thoughts about that? Do you have any kind of reaction to the green? Where does it fit into your current value kind of equation?
This is Kathy. I see the progress that these things, not necessarily one of just, gee, this is what I choose.
Mhm.
I mean, some of it is what we choose, but a lot of it is about the entire world system around us. And you're talking about whole civilizations, humankind moving to another level. And I don't think that that would happen purely by choice. It happens because there are so many forces at work that people are left with no other alternative but to move to that level. And I think that's how many of these levels started, you know, that we still have choices to move back and dip down and move up if we can, you know,
Yeah.
if we have the either the wealth or the freedom or the opportunity to move back and forth. But I think a lot of this is dictated to some degree. I mean, I don't mean to say that. I'm not quite saying it correctly. That I think that there are forces in the world that push mankind to these levels.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um,
You know,
um,
building on what Kathleen just said, I think that when the pain of not changing becomes too great, then that
Mhm.
change will occur.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be, if the orange is too painful, whether it be through natural disasters, riots, the chasm between haves and have-nots, that may force movement to green.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. I mean, I really think it's sociological and climate and economic and a whole range of other forces that push people to a certain kind of mindset and way of living that I think is occurring.
And also as the complexity, the whole idea behind spiral dynamics is that as complexity in the world increases, that's how the memes unfold, is as an answer to, or a way to solve the complexity that's occurring in the future, because the ability to solve those problems in the existing or current meme is not there. And so
Yes,
one
yes.
has to one has to unfold or uncover or allow the new ways of looking at complexity and solving those problems to emerge.
Mhm, mhm.
That's the driver of spiral dynamics.
And so that then gets us to the real question I wanted to talk about for today and Thursday, and that is, how do we as human development professionals go about helping people who want to move or want to be that? So for example, how often have we worked with a business owner who is very much in this orange kind of mode? Very much in this orange kind of mode, maybe a little bit of blue still thrown in, but primarily they're living this orange world and think the orange world is working just fine. I don't want people messing with my orange world, but I've got all these people who want some green stuff to come into play. So if they were your client and they came to you and said, help me make my green leaning people stay orange, how would that impact the work you would do with them versus someone who says, I know this isn't about them. I know this is about me. So how can you help me as that orange kind of comfort zone person become more open to some of these green things that people are wanting?
Well, that gets back to the awareness and the use of surveys. As far as I'm concerned, it's the people who are in the orange and who are succeeding in the orange have very little awareness of what's happening to the rest of the people.
Well, no, I think the book that Kathy recommended by Lulu, I got the book and was reading a part about that, and they were talking about what he says is that the leader of the organization sets the level of where the organization is going to be, and an organization will not function at a higher level than the leader is able to resonate with or embrace. And so until the level of complexity that that organization or that leader is dealing with outstrips his or her ability to solve the problems, as long as it's working for them, they don't have any incentive to move. And so it's whether or not they have awareness about how well it is working for them.
Mm-hmm. And so this idea about creating awareness, David has already suggested, and last time around gave us an example of a simple survey that he put together that opened his clients' eyes quite widely. So David, what happened following that? Did he actually open himself up to some sort of change, or?
They did. I suggested, because this was a law firm, that they put together pods of attorneys who would work on specific problems. And they had to do with succession planning, creating a better culture, hiring, a variety of things. They had no set on this executive committee, no set job descriptions or responsibilities. So, I put the people on the executive committee in charge of those, but I created pods of attorneys who would meet typically bi-weekly and move forward with seeking out solutions to some of the problems that were in the survey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so just based on what you've described, and everyone else chime in on this as well, David just actually included some of these bullet points down in green. So that change he made, that advice that he gave, which one of these 6 would that resonate with, or which among the 6 would that resonate with?
Well, it certainly liberated them from greed and dogma.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
Reach decisions through consensus.
Yeah, now of course it sounds like sooner or later your little pod would come up with whatever their decision was. They still had to take it to the powers that be to get it approved and implemented, or were they also given authority?
And they were given some authority, but they had to bring it back. And then the people on the executive committee led those teams. And I'd like to say today that they're still carrying on with that work, and they're doing a lot of the work that was set out for them. But what it really did was it decentralized the voice of the firm from the 7 elderly men who were all of a particular faith and driving the firm in a particular direction, and opened them up to a great deal of insight and possibility. It was funny because one of the things that I did was I had them age their book. In other words, what's the average age of the principal or the partner who's in charge of the work? And 80% of their book, of their entire book, was 65 years or older.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
And that was an eye opener for them.
Yeah, because that will only continue to be effective for a short period of time in the future, and then it probably won't match what people are looking
And that
for.
they had turned over literally 53 attorneys in 10 years at an average cost of about 200 grand a pop.
Oh my goodness.
$10 million gone.
You need to raise your feet.
They had no idea about that either. So all it took was a little digging and a few questions, and to get the attorneys involved, because they're, according to their managers, the smartest people in the room. Well, with a little guidance, they were pretty smart.
That's right. That's right. Well, let me do two things. I want to show you on the change grid what David has just described. So these individuals, the client himself was obviously upgraded about something, or he wouldn't have bothered engaging David in this kind of conversation anyway. So something was going on, and it was brought to their attention. And or oh no, wait, you said they were blind. You did your awareness exercise that raised their attention
Yes.
up to there. Okay, fine. So there they are, upgrade, stress, power stress, feeling a bit, well, just upgrade about the whole situation. And then David said, well, obviously we need to do something to boost their level of ability. So how would you parse out what you did with them to
Well, I
demonstrate
think,
downgrade
you know,
maneuvers?
when you talk about career satisfaction was one of the main topics, mentoring and training and onboarding and all of that stuff. You know, you give them expert guidance and point them in the direction of the articles that are best reflective of how those things can be effectively accomplished. And they were smart enough to read them and start asking good questions. And, you know, so I was moving them down grid.
And so let's look at the downgrade maneuvers for a second.
Yeah.
So normalize, simplify, restore resources, and add resources.
Yeah.
But I also heard a bit of an outgrid maneuver. Increase risk, appeal to their ego, inspire through leadership, provide coaching. Because they had to take a chance. I mean, the willingness to let you create those pods and to allow those pods to do what those pods were intended to do definitely would have been experienced by that person as a risk they were taking.
Yes.
Because they were relinquishing some control and giving control to that other group. So somehow or another, you appeal to their ego as well and let them know, like, you're just going to be better because of it. You know, you're going to be better respected, better appreciated. You're going to do better otherwise. And ultimately, did they get to the point where they could run the pods, or did you have to continue to facilitate?
We got to the point that they ran their pods.
Okay, so you inspired them through leadership to that, and then so that allowed you to just step into the mode of providing coaching as coaching was needed.
Yep, I would attend all the pod meetings, sit back, listen, meet with the leaders afterwards, and plan strategy.
Exactly. And so I think that, again, we want to be able to say that a lot of these things that we would just decide to do, we may never have thought of them in terms of being downgrade maneuvers and outgrid maneuvers. And we might not even have thought of them as being ways of moving someone from an orange reality into tipping their toe into the cool grass of the green, but we're doing that. Now, the other thing I want to say, I know we're at the top of the hour, so we'll be finished for today in just a moment or so, but I want to say something. This is something I know very, very much about David, and I'm sure it's true for a lot of you guys. But both David and I started our businesses where orange was the order of the day. Everything that we were all hired to do and deliver, it was all orange, 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 orange. In the early years of our businesses, both of us have been doing this kind of work for what, David, 35, 30, 35?
36, 30, yeah, 37 years.
37 years, okay? People weren't all that even thinking about the green stuff yet. It just wasn't there in those early days. Now, as our careers went through a few decades, yeah, we started seeing plenty of evidence of people moving on to green, and usually it was the new hires or whatever, the new energy coming along. But I think it's also important for us to realize that when you become an expert at helping someone to really thrive at one particular level, it means we have to evolve as well in order to help people move to the next level. So we're human development experts. We have to develop ourselves in order to develop whoever it is that we're working with. Otherwise, I mean, we could become just as much of an old, outdated consultant as people who get stuck in orange will end up becoming old, outdated whatevers.
Yeah.
Yep. So
You know,
just
the
the way.
whole, you know, the training and development world is all about emotional intelligence and you know, so there, I mean, it's moving green.
Yeah, exactly. And that key word there is development. We can't stay where we are. We have to be willing to move forward. And usually we got to be able to do it first before we have any hope of being able to do it for somebody else.
Yeah.
So there you go. So what I'd like to do on Thursday is finish up this little discussion about connecting this to the change grid. But we're going to be talking primarily about how you guys might become very strong coaches in the area of green development. And also, let me just slide this into the screen for a second. There are two others. Second tier, we're not quite there yet, but we're starting to experience some of the yellow as well. So accepting the inevitability of nature's flows and forms. So some of this is heading our way as well. Discovering personal freedom without harm to others or excesses of self-interest. So experience the fullness of living on an earth of such diversity and multiple dimensions. So I think we're going to start noticing that before our career paths are over as well. So we got to get really good at green. We got to prepare ourselves for yellow as well. And so that's what I'd like to talk about on Thursday. And so anyone have any final questions, comments? What we've done for today?
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Glad you liked it. Okay, great. Take care, everyone. We'll talk again on Thursday. So bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye all.